Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Wednesday, the Leading Change episode this week with Jill Stott. Hey Jill, welcome back.
Hey Vasco, it's great to be here again. Happy Wednesday.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. Happy Wednesday to you too. So today's Wednesday, we talk about change processes. We want to dive into the murky waters of change because as Scrum Masters, this is pretty much what we do. Swim in murky waters all the time.
That sounds scary.
And we want to hear a story of that process, but especially as you go through the story of the process, the change process you were part of, do highlight for us the tools, the tips, the tricks, the techniques you learned back then that you still apply today.
All right. So I hope this is okay. Let me tell you a change process that we went through a while back. So it was with a UI toolkit team, where we were developing tools for the company that could incorporate all the different software applications that we had. And we had multiple teams, and it was going fine. But once you get to the point where you have, over 5 teams, and then trying to interrelate those and keep aligned, it gets a little bit difficult. And so we had a senior manager said, everybody's going to do SAFe. So which is, it has its place. I knew I was going to get that face for me, like,
nobody saw that face, only you did.
I forget we're not on camera. No, but this turns out to be a good story. So as the Scrum Master, I got really involved to help change or transform to SAFe. And so step one, I guess, learn what is SAFe. I went to the training and all that stuff. I'm like, okay, there's some value here. Fortunately, I was a Scrum Master, but I also had a lot of connections. So I had a lot of power, if you will. So I was working really close with the product manager and the different managers to actually help this change come about. So not to belabor SAFe, but we took 3 months. We're working with the project managers as well, and we had our first PI planning. And it went pretty good, honestly. We did it all virtually, which we weren't supposed to do at that time, but like, what the heck? Who cares? We had people in India, we had people in Ireland. This is silly. And the takeaway there, the change was good and the people liked it. But here's what I learned. First of all, we prepared everybody. We made sure it wasn't too disruptive. We carved out some time. We let everybody get prepared for it, which is key. And then the best part was feedback. And people were like, this is awesome. It was so good to actually plan together. But can we not have it be 2 days? Like, it was just too long for everybody. I said, I don't think Dean Leffenwell was going to get us. I said, let's do it shorter. Let's have it shorter. So we ended up implementing what I called SAFe Light. It was basically our own version of a lighter weight scaling framework. And it turned out to be really, really good. And as far as I know, well, they're not using it anymore because they sold that product to someone in Ireland. But that's okay.
That's fine. That works too. So one of the things that came to mind as you were describing this, so SAFe is very often a solution that companies try to apply, and many successfully, others not so much, but that's the same with Scrum or any other method, because it's really what people do that matters, not the process. Mm-hmm. But when you started thinking about, okay, so I've learned about SAFe, I pretty much understand what the value is that it tries to bring. How did you start preparing the first PI planning? Because whether we like it or not, for teams that have been more or less loosely coupled, planning separately with different backlogs and so on, having a joint planning event definitely felt too much because they said, let's go back to 1 day instead of 2 days. But it can be quite disruptive, and I have experience with this myself, and I know that it takes quite a lot of work just to get the image of what the PI planning is to be conveyed to the organization, right? So how did you prepare the teams for what was coming, ultimately the PI planning event?
So what I kind of broke it down into who's going to be doing what during those 2 days. So starting with the management, I call them the speeches, the beginning of the PI planning, work very closely in helping them devise, here's what you need to do, product manager. We need to have about 10 features. You don't have to have them all in detail, that this is what we're going to work on. So a lot of it focused on the backlog, the stuff we're going to do for these next 3 months. So working at that level for the larger vision that's going to tie all of these things together across the 5-6 different teams. And then with the individual teams, working with the different Scrum Masters, all right, here's the features that this team is going to take, and start to think about those. And this is all you're going to have to do in this PI planning is stuff you've already been doing, but you'll have the opportunity when there's interdependencies with different user stories as you create them to say, hey, Bob from team 7, when are you going to do such and such? So we know when to schedule this. And once they know that, oh, that's our role and we've done this before, it's not that, at least in my experience, it wasn't that scary or difficult or a huge dramatic change, if you will. It was, I think the hardest job was for the people doing the speeches. They were freaked out, like, what am I going to say? And I need you to have a PowerPoint deck. I'm like, really? This should be your wheelhouse. So I had to help them do that.
It is surprising sometimes how the people whom we look up to for vision and guidance sometimes feel so uncomfortable in setting that vision and guidance. And that's also one of the reasons why I asked this question, because it is also my experience that it takes quite a lot of prep to get people whom we usually would expect to be able to give these speeches, as you called it, but basically setting the vision, setting the direction, to do that in public, right? Because maybe that's one of the things that I think SAFe brings that is very powerful and very positive, is the transparency that comes with necessarily the accountability on the decisions that are made up there. Right? If we look at it from Scrum Master's perspective, what are the chief product owners or senior product owners or senior product managers deciding and communicating? Because the PI planning allows us to see them do that communication, right? Because usually if you have like 3, 4, 5 Scrum teams, somehow it trickles down into the backlog. We don't really see the vision. Right. But in the PI planning, everything starts with those first statements of where are we going? What is it that we want to achieve? Right. And getting these people prepared is very important and also very necessary for the teams, because we want to enable the teams to make decisions on their own during the planning increment.
Yes, and understand, well, I could do this or I could do this, but let's align it to this is what we're trying to achieve. And before, we didn't even know, like the individual teams without that infrastructure. And honestly, I'd learned that the product management, they were just kind of shooting from the hip. Oh, let's do this. Oh, let's do this. So it kind of forced that a little bit of extra planning in order to make something better for the customers and make it easier for us teams who are trying to figure out where is the vision, where is this going as we're making those day-to-day decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we know that, we can work with product management to help them, get their message more solid, more clear for the teams, because the teams will need to make those decisions. And at least for me, that was the learning from the PI plannings that I facilitated. We can, during the PI planning, get people to talk to each other informally and have those in-depth Q&A conversations that are so important to clarify what might have been quite high-level messages at the start of the PI planning event.
Yes, absolutely. And having those senior leaders there circulating around, I'm like, hey, Barbara, what do you mean by this? It was so great. Like, why weren't we doing this before? It seems like common sense to actually just talk to each other. Before that, the planning was in this little secret room with just a few leaders, and we never knew what was going on, which was not very effective. So yeah, there's some goodness to those PI plannings.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who haven't yet looked into SAFe and are listening to this episode, it's definitely worth looking into, specifically the PI planning event, which way back when in 2018, 8 and 9 when I started working with this type of big room planning, which is what the generic name for this PI planning would be. These big room planning sessions, we call them social network activation sessions to get people to talk to each other face to face. It was face to face at that time.
That's even better,
because those relationships can avoid, infinite email threads with back and forth during the PI planning, because you can just pick up the phone and say, hey, Josh, what did you mean when you wrote X? Instead of sending an email to Mary, who then sends it to Trevor, who then sends it to Josh, because Josh is the Shift product owner. And he can only be called on a Friday at 7:30 p.m. between board meetings, right? Like that's so powerful in the PI events, this ability to activate the social network within the organization.
Absolutely. I like that. Activate. And once you put like a personality and there's a person behind that name, you're a lot more willing to, like you said, just call them. Before, it's just like, I'll just send them a text and it's just like some person you've never heard of. But once you create that connection, you actually start to work together.
Absolutely. Hey, it's not possible to work together before that.
No, just like cogs in the wheel. Cogs in the wheel.
Absolutely. Great story. Thank you for sharing, Jill.
My pleasure.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.